Story 1. When the teacher says you couldn't go to the bathroom because break time was 5 minutes ago, for literally any grade, it doesn't make sense, especially with younger grades. When a 6-year-old says they need to go to the bathroom, it's not a question, it's a warning. Story 2. The amount of hours I'm expected to put into it and still have time for extracurriculars and 8 hours of sleep, and the backlash I get when that doesn't happen. Like, I'm sorry, it's not my fault that after 7 hours of school, all 8 of my teachers expect me to set aside an hour for their subject alone after I get home, since to each of them, no other subject is nearly as important or matters at all. But that I don't even get home until 6 p.m. or even 8:30 p.m. on certain days of the week, since I need to represent the school in academics, athletics, and the arts. And that once I do get home, I have 2 dogs and 2 siblings to care for and help with their schoolwork before I can even do my own and care for my own body, before finally getting to bed and starting the day again. I do apologize for finally getting to bed around 4 a.m. and not getting 8 hours of sleep. I've been a bit busy trying to not flunk out of high school, please my parents and colleges, and taking care of the people and pets in my life that can't take care of themselves on their own. My bad, my bad. Story 3. The unfairness. I grew up in a rural area. My high school was the only one in the county, and we had maybe 300 students. I got into university and was suddenly in classes with kids who had attended public school in the same state and were years ahead of me. I remember being in calculus, where my classmates were bored out of their minds while I was struggling. Now, I'm a mom, and I hear people talking disparagingly about the schools in that neighborhood, or those people, and realize there's not much that's changed. John Kennedy said it best. All of us do not have equal talent, but all of us should have an equal opportunity to develop those talents. It's a nice dream, but it doesn't exist in reality in the US. Story 4. Just having to wake up early, to be honest. Even made it worse when the hardest class of the day was the first class of the day. It gets even worse when there is a test or quiz and I'm forced to think with my sleepy brain. Seriously, I wouldn't mentally wake up until at least 11 a.m. This method of waking up early has undoubtedly decided some life pathways. Story 5. The rigidity of my high school. There were no allowances made on the rules, even if the situation was out of our control. An example. One year there were widespread bus strikes, making taking public transport almost impossible. Majority of the students, including me, relied on getting a bus to school. In assembly, the principal announced that while they were informed of the strike, any student that was late to school would be punished. We brought it up with our form organizers, and they just shrugged and said to make a plan. Not everyone had parents that could take them to school in the mornings or pick them up, or have the resources to afford a carpool transport system. Other situations were numerous: wearing the wrong hair tie, rolling up our jersey sleeves, backpacks weren't navy blue, nitpicking on the smallest things, and then saying it would prepare us for life. Story 6. For some reason, my children have so much more homework today than I had growing up. Society complains about kids being inside so much and not getting exercise, being on devices, etc. But look past the fact that they have to do 3 to 8 pages of Common Core math, read 20 pages and do a 5-paragraph essay, study for a test every night, and have to have a perfect wardrobe. Hell, I went to school in pajamas sometimes. Story 7. The teachers who clearly hated their job but were just there for the paycheck and weekends off. Like, ma'am, it's not my fault you wanted to be a nurse and couldn't get the grades, so you settled on being a 6th grade English teacher. Story 8. Waking up early, the concept of popular kids, and the teachers who kept comparing me to my smarter sibling. I feel you so much on the sibling comparison. I was only a grade behind my sister, and I despised being called the wrong name and shamed for not being the smart bookworm that she was. I didn't fail anything, but I also didn't care about school, and my sister was the valedictorian. She got a full ride to university, and I started working right out of high school. The comparisons still haven't ended even as an adult. I should really move. Story 9. The one teacher who hated girls. I told her there was a mistake in my marks, and she looked at me like I stole her firstborn. Then came her favorite student, who had the same problem, and she apologized profusely, then changed his marks, and only changed mine when I almost begged her to change them. I hated her then, I hate her now. Might have just been my school, but I always felt my teachers, who were mostly female, favored the female students much more than the guys. I always just assumed that would be more commonplace, but maybe not. Opposite experience for me. Majority of my female teachers would always give preferential treatment to the girls in class. I had one teacher in computer labs that was the worst of all. If any guys asked her for help, she would blow them off and act like she couldn't hear them. Same for any black girls. Only the white girls would get any attention from her, and good grades, no matter how badly they did on their projects. Story 10. I hate how learning is turned into a competition where grades are prizes. For instance, instead of the teacher being proud of every student for learning, it seems like the attention is only on the best kids, which I support as well, but each child should be encouraged. I have this example of my math teacher. I went to a high school program which mainly focused on math and science, and he had this theory that only the minority of the best could have an A. He thought that most of the class should have a C, and a few should have an F. I agree with this distribution in general, because not everyone can be the best, but we were in a program specifically for studying math, and we all knew math better than our peers. Furthermore, those grades were playing a huge part in our university application, and I can objectively say that we were the best math students in the region, yet my grades were much worse than that of someone who was a student from another school. But it didn't matter what school I went to because the grades were what mattered, not our knowledge. Furthermore, every classmate of mine fought for the grade, and we started hating each other, and we started hating math. This so-called competition discouraged us in pursuing a math career and made us bitter. It took me a while to start loving science again. I still don't like math. The hell kind of system is this? Like you, I agree in principle with such a distribution, but it shouldn't be achieved by raising the bar of the A level. But what baffles me even more are the grades of one subjective teacher determining your college aspirations. I'm sorry, this really seems like an institutional blunder. Story 11. The dumb rules to test you on things. Like, why do I need to memorize these huge formulas when in the real world I'll be allowed to use a reference book? As long as I know when and how to use the formulas, it should be good enough, right? I shouldn't need to have them memorized. I took a class where all of our grades were paper and project based. No quizzes or tests at all, not even a final exam. And I loved it so much and did very well in that class. And I learned a lot from it too. Not having to memorize a bunch of crap meant I had more time to really explore the material in depth. Story 12. That there's a specific way everything is supposed to be done. Go to school, get homework that must be done at home, no compromises. The salary for teachers is too low to attract a consistent rate of good ones. Lots of kids simply do not care about their education. Schools aren't really designed with discussion and learning in mind, etc. Story 13. As a teacher, they always say to turn negative statements into positives. So here goes. I wish we taught standards that would be more beneficial to students, and I wish those standards were more consistent across the globe. As much as I love teaching algebra, I wish financial literacy standards were considered mandatory for graduation. I wish class sizes could be smaller. Nothing breaks my heart quite like the moment where I'm taking a test and I know that some students just aren't ready. As a teacher, it's hard to accommodate the gifted students and the struggling students at the same time, and smaller class sizes would just make it so much easier to help everyone. I wish curriculum designers, administrators, and teachers would see that we are a lot further from racial and gender equality in education than we thought. We need to do a lot better than adding names like Raul and Amir to our word problems and calling it quits. We need to do a lot better when it comes to sex education, addressing the history of racism, and talking about what healthy relationships should look like. I'm happy to be a teacher so I can make whatever difference I can, but we need to do better. And I'm sorry that so many of you had awful experiences due to a broken system of education. Story 14. The fact that they claim to have no tolerance against bullying. Was bullied every day from the age of 8 to 16. No matter how many times I told someone, the only responses I got were, just ignore them, don't react and they'll get bored. Have you tried making friends with them? And my all-time favorite, maybe they have a crush on you. At 26, I still haven't recovered the confidence, the self-esteem, the happiness, and the person that I could have been if the school had just helped. Story 15. Page and word count minimums on essays. It teaches exactly the opposite what's needed in the real world. In any sort of professional capacity, your emails, documentation, etc. should be concise, while essays teach us how to repeat ourselves without seeming to, and how to generally be as verbose as possible. Story 16. How every pupil was treated equally pedagogically. That may seem an odd comment, but it's true. Almost every teacher always assumes that if person A understands something in the way that the teacher explained it, then everyone else must also understand it. If they don't, they are either stupid or lazy. People are different, remember things differently, and may need different approaches to understand something. I respect that a teacher cannot tailor to every individual's needs, but they also did not seem to want to understand those individual differences between pupils. Story 17. School was very nice for me for the most part. I had a lot of friends. We used to go to the movie theater after school and play video games together. My grades were good, and I got along with the teachers. I could not wait for summer break so I could sleep in late and play Minecraft and ride my bike all day. I thought it would last forever, but then the accident happened. Story 18. The way some kids treated the teachers, no respect. The way some teachers treated kids, no respect. The social structures, cliques, attitudes that promote being a disruptive student at the expense of the people that were there to learn. That clothes, beauty, handsomeness, athletic ability, money, having a cool car, but kissing the key members of the staff got you further in school than being a good student. How unaware the staff seemed to be about the butt kissing, or simply didn't care, since it was preferable to dealing with the stoners, outcasts, loners, losers, and trying to help them understand how things worked. How unbelievably little I learned, or really how little was being taught, in relation to the amount of time and effort spent in school. I should have graduated high school with a degree in both brain science and rocket surgery. Looking back as an adult, I taught myself, and my mother taught me more than I ever learned in school. Seeing the way other countries run their schools just breaks my heart. This is a cultural thing too, but they seem to be aware that instilling a desire and curiosity about learning and letting that take over your mind really works well, rather than forcing you to learn or you're going to suffer the consequences. How quickly going to school made me not want to go to school, since it was such a shamble. That started about 6th grade, and I wanted to learn things, but just not in the crappy school system we have here in the good old US of A. That high school started so early in the morning. They're teenagers, let them start late. This seems to be slowly changing though, credit for that. That school was always inside. It's spring, let's go learn under a tree. Forcing everyone to clamp down on biological functions even though the janitor cleans up seats at least once a week in elementary school. Putting time limits on your hall pass, then having to deal with the inflated brain hall monitor. The amount of functionality literate people I work with, run into, and deal with. Those kids, soon to be living in the real world, exit the system that way, with a slap on the rear and a good luck on their way out. That continual learning as an adult is ridiculed in some circles of society. That reading is looked down on. You read books? As they stare at you like you have horns growing out of your head. That evangelism, belief in God, and the Bible is a substitute for logic. Please, practice your religion and let me practice mine, but don't play me for a fool. And shame on you for taking money from the most gullible members of your church so you can buy a jet to spread God's word quicker. Or build a new glass temple. Looking at you, Orange County, California. Poor Aunt Jenny. I could go on and on and on. Story 19. The thing I hated the most about it was how miserable it was. I couldn't do anything about it either way, but the fact that no one told me not to care so much about it. I can understand teachers pretending you're gonna have to know each and every species of amoeba there is and pressuring you to the breaking point to learn it and care about school. It's their job after all. But I still can't comprehend that my parents pressured me, yelled at me, and punished me when I was a kid, like 7 to 12, to perform better in school. Even after red flags such as pretending to be sick and literally crying and yelling not to go to school. A good parent should know something is not right at this point. This gave me a lot of childhood trauma and plenty of sleepless nights. But the worst thing is, after a while, I realized by myself, reading books and watching YouTube videos, that I shouldn't care, so I started focusing on learning some real-life methods and skills to put the money in. Eventually, I settled on online freelance work, and I started paying bills because I felt good about it. Then my parents told me that teachers told them that my performance in school has worsened, but they said that they don't care, since school isn't important anyway. Dude, what? Story 20. My school has strict rules and a weighted average that if it doesn't get over 60 means that you can't go to the next grade. And for some reason, history is worth 4 points, and I have to learn 2 languages. And yeah, my country is multilingual. The most is 5 points per grade, with different difficult crap to remember. The school promised swimming classes next year, and it's pretty certain that it won't be next year, if it even gets done at all. The reason is that we don't have a place to teach swimming, and I can foresee how people are dealing with school when it gets built. There are also rumors around the school that the higher ups are taking some of that money for themselves. That's all, and F school. Story 21. The fact that failure is always seen as something negative, and that if you fail, that means you messed up. Failing something shouldn't be a moment of defeat or getting frustrated that it's wrong, but learning what made it wrong and improving the next time. Story 22. The school won't do anything about bullying. They say, oh, we'll take care of it, but most of the time they don't listen or take students seriously until someone gives up and ends their life. Some schools will listen up and punish the bullies, but most of them are just ignoring students' cries for help. Story 23. Being closed with talented pricks who got all the attention they wished for and thought themselves to be too cool for everyone. Being noted. Even if you like learning, forget one method or lesson and you're done for. Bad memory does not help in any way. Having trouble expressing yourself even less. Ah, that sensation when you repeat all your biology lessons with your dad at perfection, acing the topics, but then you have to write and the teacher doesn't appreciate the way you put your sentences together, and bam, 7 out of 20, and your dad calls you lazy again. Being called lazy by parents when other students spend their time at school and at home, even in class, looking at Snapchat and playing gotcha and F2P games on their phones. One time I caught a student trying to smoke a joint during mathematics. I didn't report him, but damn. The food at the cafeteria. Not disgusting, but it messed up my stomach. Story 24. The workload for sure. I'm always stressed about something. If not that, then the people. I bet most of these people are good outside of school, and it's school that makes them crappy people, because let's face it, school makes everyone miserable. I'm talking about the faculty that's too underpaid to care, and the students that are always pressured to fit in and get good grades. Students are constantly biting at each other's throats, putting their peers down to get validation from people who couldn't give a rat's ass about them. I don't know if that's what makes kids so ruthless, but I swear I was bullied ruthlessly for the past 10 years of my life, and I'm going to have to deal with that crap again soon. Friend groups, for the most part, are pretty toxic. I'm pressured to hang out with a bunch of petty, dramatic, manipulative people just because my friend knows a friend. I'm sure lots of people are going through that. Teachers assign us heap loads of homework because they are trying to get their students to give a crap about the material, while we're just trying to pass the year and not die. Lots of teachers treat the bad kids with contempt and the good kids with kindness. So as a result, the bad kids get worse and the good kids get better. Nothing is solved. Story 25. Presentations and oral assessments. As someone who is not creative at all or quick-witted, and has been diagnosed with social anxiety when I was literally a primary school student, although I'm trying my best to overcome my fear, I still find speaking assessments incredibly awkward and horrible. Group discussions are also bad, since I don't have creative ideas to think about in a limited time during preparation. Also, I am a bit self-conscious about my English accent, since it's not my first language. Story 26. The absolute sexism in most female teachers against boys. I'm not going to tell all of the stories I have of this, because I'm sure Reddit has some kind of character limit, but I'll tell a few. Once, some girls got caught doing weed in their bathroom, and were let off with warnings, and nothing else. Some boys got into a fight in the bathroom, and we lost our stalls and our bathroom door, so that if you took a crap, literally anyone walking outside could fully see you. On school picture day, the girls and boys got called in separately to take pictures. When the girls left, it was the quietest our class had ever been. Most of the girls had gotten back, and the classroom once again got super loud. Our principal walked in, noticed the chaos, and called every boy in the class into the hallway, and lectured us on behavior. One time, a girl literally wore a bikini to school, and was only told to go home and change. A boy wore pajamas to school once because he had overslept and didn't want to miss his bus, and was suspended for a week. Elementary through high school, not once were the boys ever held to the same standards as the girls. and it was the worst.
Story 1. In high school, they would do trivia questions after the announcement sometimes, and the first teacher who dialed the office with the correct answer would get a prize for the class. My math teacher really wanted to win, and hadn't yet this year. So one fateful morning, the question went out, and we had the answer, so he called in, but we were the second caller. In a fit of pseudo rage, he yells, "Damn it!" and kicks this little plastic trash can across the room, where it bonks a kid right in the head. His eyes go wide, and he apologizes and asks if the kid is okay, which he is. Everyone got a good laugh afterwards, including the kid who got hit, and later we would pretend to duck whenever we didn't win the morning trivia contests. Story 2. I had a history teacher in high school who was always stern and serious, which was great since it gave a reverence to what he was teaching about, and his unpretentious nature meant he spoke about what was important and interesting. One day, however, his voice broke, and after he cleared his throat, it broke again. He stopped talking, put his hands in his pockets, frowned, and took a few breaths. "Students, sorry about this lecture. My wife and I just decided to get a divorce." He blankly stared ahead for a second and then walked toward the door, loosening his tie. "I need a drink." He exited the door. After a second, he poked his head back in. "Of water. I'm coming back. Don't think I've forgotten about Napoleon." Not too much of a meltdown, but he was a pretty manly dude in a nerdy sort of way. Story 3. Our freshman English teacher was a small, soft-spoken woman who was kind of known to be a teacher you could walk all over with little repercussions. We were in a review session after school, and some upperclassmen were just hanging out in the hallways making lots of noise, so she was constantly poking her head out in the hall asking them to be quiet. As we are all very silently reading or something, the classroom door absolutely slammed shut, so hard the latch didn't have time to catch, and the door bounced back open. The teacher immediately yells, "Oh, hell no," and kicks off her heels and takes off out the door. She caught up with the kid, who had taken a running start and kicked the door shut, and berated him for a good 10 minutes, which we could hear clear as day from the end of the hall. It was like nothing we'd ever heard from her. Story 4. I was in a band. One day, one of the regular always in trouble disruptive students was being extra disruptive while the director was trying to tell us something important. So after about 5 different times of going the normal route to get him to settle down, he cracked. It got quiet, and then the director bellowed, "William, are you stupid or just don't give a crap?" The whole room was quiet. All eyes were now on the disruptive kid who was then trying to hide behind his tuba. Then, the director continued with his announcement like nothing happened. Story 5. My super dorky history teacher in 8th grade was the nicest teacher I've ever met. But there were a couple class clowns in our class, and he usually dealt with them okay. One day, though, they were obnoxious to the entire class from the moment he walked in, and he snapped, yelling and chucking his stapler across the room. He nailed a staple right into Ben Franklin's forehead. He immediately apologized and went about his day normally, while all the students went silent. Nobody ever bothered him again after that day. Story 6. A Spanish teacher I had in high school ended up having a meltdown on the day of the final exam. The whole semester, my class had been pretty chatty, but really nothing that out of the ordinary. On the day of the final, there was an event that set her off. If I remember correctly, he was talking during the exam. His cell phone may have gone off instead, it's been a while. She proceeded to attempt to pick up the desk with a 17-year-old sitting in it and slam it on the ground. The kid got up, and then she flung the desk along the floor, slamming it against the door, and told him to finish his exam outside. Then she proceeded to tell the rest of us what terrible people and students we were. She also told us that she had gained 20 pounds over the course of the semester because of how bad our class was. Then she felt the need to tell us about how she'd been raped as she broke down sobbing. After that, I just did my best to finish my exam as quickly as possible so that I could go home, as that was my last class of the year before summer. Story 7. Junior year of high school, I decided to take a psychology class. The administration switched a lot of teachers around that year and hired a lot of new ones too, so I didn't know anything about him. As the semester goes on, his behavior starts slipping, and the class starts noticing. He begins to lose his patience more and more frequently when the class doesn't respond to a question immediately. His behavior then progressed to him throwing whiteboard markers at students for not paying attention or answering incorrectly. Then one day, about half the way into the semester, he completely loses it. A group of 3 students laughed at something within their own conversation just as class was starting, and our teacher saw and made a comment to the class that if we weren't going to listen, he would make today hell. Some kids spoke up saying he would go to the principal if he did anything to hurt the class. So the teacher began throwing markers, erasers, anything he could find at the student. The student got up to leave for the principal's, and the teacher stood up on his desk and screamed at us. He ran to the front of the classroom, where the student who spoke out was, picked up a desk and threw it at the student. Thankfully, it didn't hit him, but the teacher ran to the door to prevent anyone from leaving, and said if anyone said anything about that day to anyone, he would ruin their lives. Some friends and I told the principal and administration, and I actually had to go into court to testify. Turns out, the guy suffers from schizophrenia as well as some degree of PTSD after serving in the military. I don't remember what ended up happening with him. At the time, I really didn't care to know. Bummer. I really wanted to hear this end with something like, at the end of the semester, he tied his erratic behavior to a lesson plan. Some kind of Dead Poet Society or something. We had a physics teacher in 11th grade that fake reversed graded the first big exam. All the smart kids did bad, didn't understand why, and the couple broke down. He quickly blended that into the next lesson and handed out the proper grades at the end of the class. Was a total mind F. Story 8. Junior year in university, my genetics professor was in the middle of a lecture when authorities took him out of the auditorium, thank goodness, and informed him that his wife, the dean of our college, had been struck and killed by a motor vehicle that morning. He retreated to his office and proceeded to tear the place apart like a tornado had gone through it. He ripped the top of his desk off its frame, pulled down all of his bookcases, books, pages, papers, all sorts of documents and furniture strewn everywhere in pieces. By the time I graduated, he still wasn't the same man as he was before that awful day. Story 9. This was in high school. We had a band teacher. His nickname was Pinky because he had very red hair and pale skin with a red tint, borderline albino. Every time he got mad, his entire face turned tomato red. I don't remember the sequence of events, but he was already frustrated. Everyone in the room knew to shut up so that we didn't piss him off. Well, everyone except this one dippy girl. She asked something along the lines of, "Are you mad?" and kept pestering him. He finally snapped. His face turned that familiar shade of tomato red, and he threw the pencil he was using to conduct across the room. He then stormed out and slammed the door hard enough that it could be heard on the other side of the building. He quit soon after. Story 10. Year 9 math class. Our teacher was sick, and an early 20s substitute teacher came in to cover. She was lovely, kind, friendly, although a bit timid and shy. One girl in our class used a fountain pen to flick ink on a shirt she was wearing one day. Poor woman noticed her do it, didn't say a word, and just went to her desk, put her head in her hands, and sobbed. Didn't even move for 10 minutes at least. Eventually, a friend of mine went to get another teacher. The sub was escorted out, still crying, and was seen for the rest of the day just crying in her car, not moving for another 4 or so hours. Story 11. 8th grade math teacher. He was well known for his short temper, but this particular day was bad. There was a kid in my class, Justin, that never listened and never did his homework. One day, the math teacher just had it with Justin, grabbed his desk with him in it, and picked it up and slammed it back down on the ground a few times. After that, he shoved the desk with Justin in it across the room. Justin was fine, thankfully, but the math teacher just stormed out. Told my mom, and I guess a few other parents called the school about it too. He was gone for a few weeks and had to take anger management classes. I just went by my old middle school a few weeks ago, and he's the assistant principal now. Who would have expected that? Story 12. In high school, our government teacher freaked out on my class. We had a few talkers in the back corner, but they finally broke him. He flipped his podium lectern over and started screaming at us. He called us the worst group of kids he'd ever had to teach, and that he was 110% accurate that we were going to be nothing. He then went to his desk and drank his entire thermos of coffee. A few years later, he was having a retirement party at his house. I was close friends with his son. He revealed that the thermos was 80% vodka and 20% coffee. Story 13. Had a sub in 5th grade. I was a really unorganized kid, and having to dig through my desk for crap wasn't uncommon. Sub went to collect our homework one by one, and I was still digging through, pulling a bunch of stuff out when she got to me. She started towering over me and told me this was unacceptable, dumped my desk in front of me and told me I was staying in from recess to organize it. One girl said, "You can't make him do that." And the sub raised her voice and spit out, "You don't tell me what to do, brat. I can do whatever I want." The whole class revolted, and a neighboring teacher came in to see what was up. The sub claimed I was being lippy, and this was my punishment. Then the whole class spoke up and informed him of what really happened, and we were all let out for recess. Came back in, and a lunch lady was sitting at the teacher's desk instead. As the kid who was always picked on by everyone, it was nice to see the whole class stand up for me that day. Story 14. I taught public high school for 7 years and have been teaching in a university ever since. Every time one of these threads pops up, I expect to find the story of how I once broke down in tears when a cell phone rang in class. Or the time I threw up in a trash can, brushed my teeth with bottled water in front of all 42 students, asked a janitor to come down and take the trash out, and went back to teaching after my favorite student of all time faked barfing noises because he knew it would make me puke. Story 15. My junior year in nursing school, we took a nursing psych class. The professor was not a good teacher, to put it lightly. She regularly would talk about her personal life instead of teaching what was outlined on the syllabus. About halfway through the course, we had our midterm exam, which consisted of about 75% of questions of stuff we had not covered in class. I think the highest grade anyone got was a 65%. The next class, she berated us and told us all we were going to be bad nurses. One of the people in my class wrote a letter to her, saying that she spends most of the classes not teaching the material, and it's not justifiable to give us exams if we know more about her personal life than what we are supposed to be taught, citing the syllabus given to us at the beginning of the semester. All of us in the course signed the letter. Next class, she absolutely lost it on us, screaming at us about how disrespectful we are and how we will never amount to anything. This got to the point that the dean of the nursing program heard her from down the hall and had to come remove her from the classroom. Next class, we had another professor for the rest of the semester. The dean told us she was on hiatus and said that we brought up our grievances in a respectful manner and commended us on that. The professor who broke down never came back to teach at the school. Story 16. I was bullied a lot around this time, and I started fighting back against the bullies. The teacher noticed this and thought it'd be a good idea to remove me, and who is essentially my arch nemesis, from the playground during lunch, and make us do crafts in a classroom instead. I think they were trying to make us get along by working together, but that doesn't happen with 11-year-olds. Unsupervised for a whole hour in a locked classroom. She leaves, and when she returns halfway through the hour, the classroom is a mess, chairs strewn everywhere, our school jumpers and shirts are torn. I had a bleeding ear and he had a swollen lip and bruises everywhere. We freeze as soon as she catches us, and she just collapses to the ground. She sobbed into her hands. "All I wanted was for you to be friends. Was that so much to ask?" She wept uncontrollably for the next 5 minutes. We felt awful about it. We shook hands and tried to clean up the classroom. The next day, we had a substitute teacher, who eventually became our permanent one, and he was horrible. I guess it worked though. It's 16 years later, and I'm on the way to my enemy's house to drink and play board games. So, yeah. Story 17. My 8th grade algebra teacher, also German teacher, Mr. Cogburn, was an interesting guy. He was tall, had kind of wild-looking frizzy gray hair and a beard, and had a sort of boisterous, larger-than-life kind of personality. He started every single class by slamming the door and yelling. He yelled, or as I would realize once I got into theater in high school, he projected, through the entire class period, though he never really came across as intimidating. He always had a yardstick in his hand that he would slap forcefully against the blackboard to emphasize what he was saying. He would also slap it against the desks of students who weren't paying attention. though he was exceedingly careful to not actually hit the student. It wasn't terribly uncommon for him to break yardsticks, and there was always another one in the supply cabinet to replace the one he'd broken. He had a little song/chant he made up for remembering the slope-intercept form of an equation for a line that I will probably remember until the day I die. He also gave the most effective, and to 8th graders both hilarious and embarrassing, explanation of how to divide fractions. He stood on a desk and told us, "Always divide the top." He pointed at his head. "By the bottom." He then turned around and pointed at his own ass. "Never divide the bottom because the bottom," here he helpfully gestured up and down the length of his ass, "is already divided." That's what Mr. Cogburn was like. He was big and loud and crazy, but not in a scary way. We told new students that the way to tell he was actually mad was if he started the class by shutting the door like a normal person and speaking quietly, and that was when they should be scared. Now we get to the story of the meltdown. Every year, our school did an event called the Mathathon. Students were given math worksheets and tried to solve as many problems as they could in a set amount of time. People, usually the parents, would sponsor the students, pledging a certain amount of money for each problem correctly solved, and at the end, the money was donated to a local charity that helps the disabled. It was that time of year, and Mr. Cogburn was explaining the Mathathon to my class. And when he got to the part about the charity and what they did, one boy, who probably thought himself incredibly cool and edgy, loudly said, "I don't know why anyone bothers to help those tards. We should just let them all die." And Mr. Cogburn transformed. As I said before, dude was tall, well over 6 feet, but his height never came across as imposing at all. Now, he loomed over that student's desk like the freaking angel of death. He seemed to physically radiate pure rage. I swear to all that's holy, you could feel his outrage coming off of him in waves. Even though he was focused solely on the one boy, students halfway across the room sank down in their chairs in pure terror, trying to disappear under their desks. I know because I was one of them. We couldn't even look at him, not out of the usual crap he's mad, don't make eye contact instinct most people have, but more like it was a form of physical protection. He was a burning sun of anger, and if we looked directly at that sun, it would blind us. He spoke very, very quietly to the boy for about a minute. I didn't make out what he said. Then he led the kid out of the room and shut the door. About a quarter of the class started crying as soon as he left. After a while, the other math teacher came in and taught for the rest of the period. What we all found out later, and which none of us, including that boy, had known, was that Mr. Cogburn's daughter, who he spoke about to us frequently enough, was not his only child. He and his wife had also had a son that was born extremely physically disabled, and who had died at a very young age from health complications arising from those disabilities. When he took that student out of the room, I think we all thought that he was going to kill him. He actually just took him down to the principal and explained what the kid had said, and the kid was suspended for a day. Mr. Cogburn also took the rest of the day off. So that was the biggest meltdown I have ever seen from a teacher, and it was sort of the inverse of a normal meltdown. When he was shouting, gesticulating wildly, and hitting our desks with yardsticks, we loved the guy and feared nothing. But that day when he got so quiet, we felt mortal effing terror.